It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Al, as we speak, Joe Biden has just returned from what appears to be a very successful trip to Europe. As Craig was saying last week, this kind of trip can be very helpful with presidents since they tend to improve their favorability numbers. And given that he was already holding steady in popularity before the trip, one can only imagine that those poll numbers will even be better soon. But the question for you all today is whether those Biden poll numbers will help Vice President Harris as she continues to take on some of the toughest assignments for this administration. There will be a critical review of Harris's performance over the next few years. And I wonder if you might assess where she stands now.
So come back in a couple of years and I'll give you an honest answer about what I think. But just a couple of observations. You know, it's rare for a sitting vice president to get directly elected to the presidency. In our lifetime, only George H.W. Bush has done it. So we ought to ask Craig this question. He's the expert. He led that campaign. Others running for vice president, like Nixon, or as vice president, like Nixon and Gore, lost close races. And even Biden didn't run directly as vice president for the presidency because among other reasons, his president, Barack Obama, didn't pick him, didn't push him over Hillary Clinton. He sort of sat back. So if the president doesn't run for president for reelection in 2024, I'm sure that Vice President Harris will be a strong candidate. But you know, it's possible that a new candidate will emerge, and that, like Obama, that Biden will sit it out and not get directly or at least intensely involved. You know, you really got me thinking last night when you sent this question, and so I went and I read a wonderful essay in Atlantic by George Packer on the divisions in our country. Packer, who's written a new book on this, and this was sort of a very long excerpt, divides our country into really four Americas. The free America, which is Craig Fuller, led by, sort of dominated politics for the last 50 years, started by Reagan and then perverted a little bit by Newt Gingrich. Then there's the smart America, which is Clinton, Obama, the meritocracy, the world that most of us really live in to a large degree. And then there's the real America, which he said started with Sarah Palin, but is the Trump America. White, Christian, pretty angry, needs people that to fight at both atop them and below them. And finally, there's the just America, which people who thinks that America is just basically unjust, and it's it's the AOC model. Well, these dynamics, I think, are pretty accurate, but they're changing dramatically, and you don't know what it's going to be like by 2024 or 2028. You know, when Vice President Harris ran as a candidate in 2020, she was not very successful. A lot of us thought she was going to be a great candidate and she'd just sweep through. But one of the reasons is she had a hard time defining who she was. Was she going to go as a progressive, or was she going to go as a moderate? In the changing dynamics of America, she's going to have to define who she is and how she relates to those changing dynamics before we can really make an assessment of how strong a candidate should be in 2024.
Greg, what's your take? I know that you've been a student of Vice President Harris for a while, since you both come from California. Is this a tricky thing for her to navigate as Biden's popularity goes up?
Well, being vice president is, I think, always tricky, especially for someone who's held public office, who has espoused, views on a variety of issues. They're used to taking stands and defending them. And the role of the vice president is to support the president and the policies of the administration. I think, to your question, yes, the two tasks she's been specifically asked to take on, both dealing with immigration issue and the reasons for people from countries to the south wanting to come across our border, and then the voting rights issue, are two big issues. They're difficult ones. The fact that she's willing to take them on, I think, speaks well of her. And so I think that probably, she'll earn credit for doing that. She also has to be given credit for the fact that we're this far into this first year of the first term without gaffes, without big mistakes. And this is not a natural fit. In other words, this is someone who's been very active in holding elected office on her own, and she's playing this supportive role, but it seems to be going well. She seems to be somebody upon whom the president relies for advice, as he likes to say, the last person in the room. So I think as Biden's standing goes up, and I do think this trip should help him, as his standing goes up, so does hers. There is a very important job coming, however, which he doesn't even have to assign her because it's just expected, and that's the elections next year. She is kind of in job number one, aside from whatever the other roles might be. Job number one is widening the leadership margin in the House and in the Senate, raising money for Democratic candidates. And I think that as the administration is viewed more favorably, she will be more successful at that. She also will have, as we've talked about so often, and Al rightfully points out, I thought she'd be a stronger candidate, but she had a little difficulty getting grounded. But this time around, she has the administration's policies, and she will have good news to talk about with regard to the pandemic and the elimination or the great sharp reduction of this pandemic. And she'll have good news to talk about, I believe, in the economy. And those are two powerful messages to take around the country. Her job will be to expand the base. And so all of the things that will help more Democrats get elected help her if she, in fact, should find herself in a position to run. I think the only way she finds herself in that position, obviously, is if President Biden decides to step back. It's not clear he intends to do that at this stage. And so there really isn't much she can do about organizing a campaign. She's really, in fact, going to work, she'll find, as hard next year, traveling as far and wide next year as she would in a presidential campaign. And that'll be a testing ground. If she comes off of that experience kind of trouble-free, if she comes off having been an effective fundraiser and an effective campaigner, then it's kind of wait and see what the president wants to do. That's the very best thing that could, I think, happen for her.
Al, I would agree with Craig that there have not been blunders, but there's been some interesting strategies on her part. The one that comes to mind is her decision, at least at this point, not to visit the border, which has turned out to be somewhat red meat for conservatives or for the Republicans. What's your take on that kind of decision making?
I guess I don't think it's very important in the greater scheme of things. If the immigration crisis gets solved, Biden will get the credit, and then if she runs, she'll be able to take some of that credit. If it doesn't, it may be a liability. I think there are a couple of other interesting things, though, that are happening. I mean, who knows what the Democratic Party is going to be like in 2024?
I think the fact that there are stories about her not visiting the border really relates to the fact that there's far more coverage of her, far more interest in her by the media than there have been of past vice presidents. Honestly, Vice President George Bush in the first year of the Ronald Reagan presidency wasn't getting a lot of press. we had to struggle even in the beginning of the second term when I was his chief of staff to get people to pay attention to what he was saying and doing. It just wasn't an office that was followed so closely. But Kamala Harris is different, and she has a lot more attention being paid to her. And I agree with Al. I don't think when she goes to the border, because eventually she will, is probably as crucial. I do think it speaks to the fact that her movement, her activities, what she chooses to engage in, what she says every single day, is being watched a lot more closely. And for that reason, the stakes are probably higher for her.
I think the stakes are higher because of the age of the current president, right? I mean, you're dealing with an unusual situation. Maybe that's ageist on my part, but I think America is probably more focused than they ever have been on secession. And in the case that, a 79 or 80-year-old has something happen.
That's true, but I will tell you that from my experience, the defense, the intelligence community, the apparatus around a president and a vice president in our time, it is remarkable the preparation that goes into what could happen if a succession were to occur, and it could be a few days or it could be longer. But the systems are in place, and I think that again, she has the experience in both state and federal government that to move into that role should that happen for any period of time. But I think it's probably very much in the mind of the president as well to make sure she's fully involved, fully engaged in the intelligence briefings and in the work that's being done by the administration, which is really what the country should demand, and I think in this case we're getting.
Al, maybe I'll give you the last word.
Biden is older, but so is most of the country, and I guess I think people. I don't think people are sitting here worried about or thinking about what's going to happen. Some of us might be because we've been through. We know the pressures of being in the White House and all of that, but I don't think that's the case. I think the other thing, I just think this is so hard to define. I mean, the most important Democrat right now is Joe Manchin, and he's not vice president. And he said something last night that may turn out to be very important, which is he offered a compromise on voting rights, or at least suggested one. I don't know if they'll get anywhere, but it'll get as far as HR 1, if not farther. And one of the things, it is a great advantage to follow a successful sitting president and run, but you're also limited by that president. So Craig said something really interesting, and that was that George Bush had a hard time getting attention because people, and Reagan at that time his age was more an issue than Biden's is now, and that probably in the end worked to his advantage because he's the only one who won under those circumstances.
Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thanks so much. See you next week.